One of the things Damien mentioned was as he was coming down, he saw people collecting scrap. What's happened is that there are signals that the industry is about to be freed up again. And chatting earlier this afternoon with somebody from a utility, one of their first remarks was they had a big theft over the weekend. So what has happened, therefore, is that even as the government gets ready to put in place rules and regulations which allow for the reopening of the industry, the trade is beginning to beat that change, and already crime has started to rear its head. The other thing that we need, I think, to be very clear on is the volume of non-theft scrap metal that is really available in Jamaica. And it's something that I'm sure some of you in the audience will comment on. But wearing my hat as an ex-economist, if indeed scrap metal was there in abundance, then there would be no need to engage in theft. And this speaks then to the quantum, to the number of dealers, etc., that should be allowed to participate. We have to take stock of the supply side very, very carefully, even as we focus on the issues of demand. This afternoon we're very privileged in that we have Mr. Boudin with us. Mr. Boudin is a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. And he has graciously agreed to make a few comments before we throw it open to you all. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Boudin to come forward.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall Hall, Chairman of Capri, Dr. Tufton, my former boss, and Dr. Damien King, Executive Director of Capri. First of all, I must say, on behalf of the ministry, we would really like to thank Capri for doing this work. It is good when we are able to harness our intellectual capacity of the university to solve everyday, real-life problems that we have in industry. And as such, we really need to applaud Capri for this. I want to make a few comments on the presentation before some of the points that were raised by Dr. Tufton and Dr. Damien King, before I make some other points which are kind of new and different. And that is, Dr. King mentioned the two important points, and that is scrap metal recycling is going to be important in the future. It's going to be here to stay for two important reasons. One, the energy cost to recycle scrap metal is less than smelting the ore. And energy cost is increasing, and therefore metal produced from scrap metal is going to be less expensive. That's a very important point that we need to note. The second one is that for certain kinds of metals, ore availability is going to decline in the future. And so in a way, we have to treat a non-renewable resource almost in a renewable form by recycling. And so it is important that government really puts in place appropriate regulatory regime to address the problem of theft. Now, the importance of the industry cannot be ignored. And there are four reasons why the ministry is looking at the industry in a very important way. And I want you to remember these. One, it cleans the environment. If you go to certain sites, businesses, and so on, and see the amount of material, metallic material which they have stored, it consumes a fair amount of valuable space. that space needs to be relieved so that businesses are able to operate more efficiently. So we need to clean the environment. Two, it creates jobs, and more importantly, jobs, I would say, at the lower socioeconomic strata of the society, as Dr. King outlined a while ago. Three, it earns foreign exchange, and as I said earlier, it recycles. So, we are making a non-renewable resource or somewhat renewable in a sense. So given these important factors, we cannot ignore this industry. We have to grapple with it. And as Dr. King rightly said, it's a global problem, and we have to draw on global experiences to be able to put in place a regime that is robust and help enable us to mitigate some of the challenges which we face today. I must tell you that our regulatory regime, when we did extensive research before we formulate those regulations, extensive research, and today with the internet, nothing can hide, nothing good can hide. People are very willing to share their experiences. And so the regulations are actually quite rigorous. I note the 10-point recommendations made by Capri. Good recommendations. Some of them, Dr. King, are in place at the moment. You may not quite note that. I noticed at least 4 of them. Enforcement, of course, is a problem. For example, in the case of the dealers, dealers are required to be registered. Dealers are required to keep records of purchases because we want vertical traceability from the exporter right back to the owner of the scrap metal. So the dealer is required to have records, and if, for example, the inspector at the time of loading identifies material that is questionable, he must be able to trace that material right back to the owner who sells it. Now, I can't tell you that that is observed to the letter of the law. We must understand the difficulty actually, and let me tell you how challenging this thing really is. When you travel and you come through customs, and the immigration form says you must list the items that you have acquired abroad. It's impossible at that time for you to remember what you have in your suitcase. Of course, the space doesn't allow you that flexibility anyway. And so you write personal effects. So if you look on a truck loaded with scrap metals, and imagine that a dealer has to write down, describe each item in detail as is required by the regulations, it is almost an impossible task. So the regulations are actually quite rigorous. But we note the point. The point you made also about limiting the site, you're so very right. What we must understand is that the regulation that governs scrap metal site they are somewhat similar to other regulations that govern exports in general. And in order to ensure the integrity of exports from Jamaica, we require that all exporters export from registered sites, whereby JAMPRO is required to inspect and ensure that the site meets certain requirements. Outside of scrap metal, the concern, of course, has been contraband. So, for example, if you're exporting pumpkins, a concern is that persons could cut the pumpkin, put contraband in there, and seal it back. That has been the concern. And so the regulations in terms of security of the site and so on, so that unauthorized persons do not get entry to the site, that has been the concern. In the case of scrap metal, that's not so much the concern yet. Not saying that it cannot be.